Okay, so what we're going to talk about this morning is we're going to talk about something that you actually, that is not an object that you can think about, but we're going to talk about being. And we're going to talk about it particularly in terms of being contemplative. Swami Dayananda said a very interesting thing in the book called Action Reaction, that in terms of just being, bringing your mind to yourself and thinking of no other thing, he said we need to become familiar with ourselves as distinct from, the functions of thinking. We need to become familiar with ourselves as simply being a simple conscious person. And it really is the doorway to another kind of life, because normally we're caught up in becoming, so that we're caught up in functions. We're caught up in thinking about something and going towards ends. Have you noticed that? In functional life, it's all about going towards functional ends. So I imagine myself unhappy, I want to be happy. Now, of course, we have to, render to Caesar what is Caesar's. We need to live in the functional world in the best possible way in terms of conduct, in terms of a life, attempting to, which we'll never do perfectly, but attempting to live in such a way that our conduct is in conformity with love or acceptance or goodwill, and conformity with caring. Okay, but we all know that because we're limited beings, Swami Dayananda says freedom exists in spite of the limitations of the mind-sense-body complex. Now, who's ever heard this silly idea that spiritual enlightenment or freedom or whatever would then mean that as a mind-sense-body complex, you'll be perfect? Who's ever seen that delusion? It's ridiculous. It's this is just not going to happen. So what happens is that why being is such a hard thing to approach is because you can't do being. Being is already given. You even can't arrive at being because you're never away from being. You can't, it's not possible to, with an act of will or through my actions, arrive at being. That's completely a mistake. What we need to do is we need to know to use Swami Dayananda, we need to come to a realization or a recognition of what does it mean to be? What does it mean to be? Now, the thing is that, and when we're talking about being, what we're talking about is, in the context of our binding desires, we're not interested in being at all. In fact, we're afraid of being, because in terms of the process of becoming, we want to become somebody. We want to be a somebody. Okay? So I want to be a somebody that's loved, a somebody that's respected, somebody who's outstanding. You all know what I'm talking about here. And the thing is that, and in that journey of becoming, what characterizes it, once we do various actions and we either experience ego inflation, like am I good or am I good, right? Or we experience ego deflation. Oh, I'm such a scumbag, I'm no good, right? Okay, so we have these, in terms of this striving to be something other than what I'm being right now, which Swami Dayananda calls the life of becoming. There is no being in the life of becoming, but the only thing that liberates us from the process of becoming is being itself, being. So we're just going to examine this today. We're going to examine it in a very simple way. And we'll just have a look at something St. Thomas Aquinas talked about being. He says that being has no parts. The interesting about being, it has no parts. Now, when I'm self-dissatisfied, I hate being what I'm like. Do you notice there's two parts there? There's the part I hate, and there's the part that's hating the part that I hate. You know, I'm fragmented. I'm not being. And so what we need to do is we need to examine this whole question, but we need to see the meaning of what it means to be, because you see, it's a bit cheeky. Even we're not talking about being as an object that we can think about. That's just not possible, because the only way we can know being is by being. That's so. Otherwise, you know, and being, and where is being? Right here. When is being? Right now. Do you know what I mean? And what does being look like as I am? Because it's so immediate. There's no mediation. Now, you know how Swami Dayananda often talked about the clay pot and the clay. Is there a gap or a distance between the clay pot and the clay? Is there a spatial distance between the two? Now, this is very important to understand, because this means that the presence of the clay pot, which is because it's there, you see it. The presence of the clay pot is the presence of clay. Can you see that? The very being of the clay pot is clay. Now, at any one moment, am I in an experience of myself? At any one moment, my experience takes a particular form. Now, what's interesting here is that when I'm upset with myself, I can't stand being what I'm like. When I'm caught up in that, I hate being what I'm like. I'm caught up in, I'm not simple. I'm not being simple, am I? There's parts to me, you know, and basically I'm caught up in my mind. There is no, because it's there, I'm seeing it. There's all, because I'm seeing it, it's there. So what happens is that the last place that we would look, and the last place that we actually look, because from the side of personality, when we're caught in personality, our whole interest is self-preservation as personality. So the problem is that we fear being, because when I'm simply being, there's no one there that's outstanding. I'm not being a somebody that's getting applause or getting beaten. I'm just being. Now, so it's interesting that St. Thomas Aquinas, his understanding of God was the fullness of is, the fullness of is. So have you noticed that in the world of becoming, where are we seeking refuge? Where are we seeking refuge? We are seeking refuge in people and things. Have you noticed that? We're seeking refuge, and we're either unhappy that we're not successfully getting the refuge that we want, or we're feeling happy that we're getting the refuge that we want. But when I'm caught up in subjectivity, which is this process of becoming, I am this and I want to become that. You see how that I am this, you know, that's I am this self here, who's this, and I want to become that. And so, you know, and again, that I want to become is an idea, isn't it? And it's only valuable to me. Why is it valuable to me that I get what I want? Because, you know, what Swami Dayananda says, we only seek happiness because we're miserable. So the thing is that, so as far as the world goes, the process, the means to salvation is becoming. Can you see that? Is becoming. But what Swami Dayananda introduces us to is the fact that he says the beginning of Vedanta is the understanding that God is the material cause of the universe. Now, what that means is that you've got a clay pot, but is that clay pot pervaded by clay? It is, isn't it? It doesn't have any separate existence. But have you noticed with us human beings, we tend to think that we're a separate individual living in a world of other things. And this is what we are. So we can't possibly, there's no hope in becoming. And so when people talk about, when people talk about spirituality, which is the transformation of the human being, there's a tendency to become a striver. I'm going to get somewhere. I'm going to arrive. And yet Swami Dayananda says, no. Vedanta is a journey without distance. Of course it has to be a journey without distance. So it's completely dependent on our understanding. So unless we understand what it means to be, we can't be. Remember, he says in the teaching, you can only be aware of what you know. So if I don't recognize and clearly understand what being is, I can't be. Are we all tracking here? Okay.
But being,
Yeah.
well, so what the question is there a process in which we drop that which prevents us from just simply being?
Very good. There's no process. No. This is the point. The act of knowledge is seeing the meaning. Now, that's what Swami Dayananda. So when I see the meaning, I can be that. In Vedanta, when I am seeing the meaning, I am being that meaning. There's not a temporal relationship. It's what Swami Dayananda calls living the vision. He says you need two things: the wisdom, which is the recognition, seeing the meaning, and then the living of that meaning. But the doorway is understanding. It is not a process. This is why this subject is quite difficult, really, for modern people. And this is why people tend to turn Vedanta into a process, which it's not. But it's not, but it's... Yeah?
No, I'm having a difficulty because whether you call it seeing the meaning or whether you call it simply being, seeing the meaning sounds like a thing, a process. That's all.
It's true because of language. But remember what Swami Dayananda says. You use words as a mirror. Normally what happens is words are used to locate an object and describe an object. But what Swami Dayananda would do when you were listening to him, he was actually just simply seeing, and then you found yourself seeing as he saw. We'll go into this a bit more, but it's not a functional process. Right? Now, so you were going to say something, Kevin?
Oh, you actually covered it a bit about this. It's this seeing the meaning is, it's not like I work it out. It's like suddenly I find it obtains me where I find I'm being this meaning where I'm seeing.
Yes. And it's not an object. Swami Dayananda never talked about an object away from ourselves, particularly when he's talking about God. God is not an object away from ourselves.
And it's not something I work out because it obtains in me when I give up myself, my calculated thinking. And
yes, but you're not going to give up your calculative thinking without knowledge.
No.
So the thing is, it's a recognition of what being is. And we need to expose our minds, like, what I'm talking about here. I'm taking what he says and then we're just examining it, We're examining it because, so what we're looking at is we're looking at being, but we're not looking at it as an object. And we're going nitty nitty, not this, not this. So it's not functional. That's good to know. It's not functional. It's a journey without distance, because that brings me back to myself as I am. Now, this is very interesting. You know, when we talk about myself as I am, it is only in the light of awareness do I see myself as I am. Now, this, see, for the Hindus, they have this, you know, Satchitananda, which we put in the English vernacular here. This life, real life, light, and fullness is abidingly present, all pervasive, and constantly embracing us. Are we all clear on that? Right now, so it's only in this light of awareness, which is not mine, which is not an ego function. It is only in the presence of this do I see. In other words, because it's there, I'm seeing it. So in the light of awareness, it's because because it's there, I'm seeing it. So when I come back to myself simply as I am, do you see how really the very act of remaining with myself as I am is to remain in the light of awareness? Do you all see that? This is what's so beautiful, actually. So if, let's say, for example, I'm upset, I'm angry, right? When I'm drawn back, when this light pulls me back into what and showing me what I'm exactly like, can you see how that's actually a gift? Okay, it's a gift. Because this illuminating light brings me into the world objectively. Because it's there, I'm seeing it. Right, so it's a very important thing to be able to simply, and what for Swami Dayananda, what's so important is learning how to rest in being, which he calls being relaxed in the lap of Isvara, doesn't he? Now we say, well, where's Isvara? Where is he? Where is he? Now this is where Swami, when you first hear this, you think it's nuts. I thought it was nuts. No? Everything here is Isvara. And he's not giving us a philosophical, cosmological proposition to either agree to or not agree to. What he's unfolding is a vision in which I realize that the very presence of God is not away from any aspect of my experience. I mean, that including my anger, my frustration, my loneliness, my fear, whatever. This is a magnificent thing. So that the Hindu thing of God is the material cause of the universe, what that means is God is ever present. God is omnipresent. He's not more in one part of my experience than another. Constantly is. Now, the thing is that, so, and Isvara is not like Brahman, it's not God in itself. Isvara is God in his manifest form, which is just completely embracing me. All right? So, but this embrace is not a theoretical thing. Now, I want, as I'm talking, I want you to notice something. I want you to notice that this shining light of awareness is actually manifesting by showing you, because it's there, you're seeing it. Like, so I can see, you know, I can hear sounds, I can hear so the very seeing of what is here, even in terms of form, is the manifestation of the light of being. Do you see that? So the very fact that I can act like this, you know, try this. Try not to be aware of what's happening now, please. Thank you. Just try not to be aware of it. You can't, because it's not, the light of awareness is not an ego function. It's not yours. However, we find it as human beings that when we live in the light of awareness, knowingly, in the light of awareness, we change as an individual. Because when we're living in the light of awareness, we're living in being, aren't we? Because light, chit, is sat. It's not distinct. And because there's no parts to being, there's a fullness. In other words, this light, being, embraces everything. Nothing is outside it. We all clear so far? I know this is pretty simple, but we want to just tease it out because it's so important. So when Swami Dayananda says that the supreme action is this, I bring my mind to myself and think of no other thing. Do you know that he said that an appointment with yourself is an appointment with God? Did you know that he said that? Okay, so, so that means that I am being with God when I'm being with myself. Now, this is quite a remarkable revelation, and it's not often talked about, but this is core to what he is trying to convey to us, that where we find our rest is in the presence of God. Now, and once we know that the presence of God is the very presence of what's here, like the presence of clay is the presence of the clay pot, agreed? And when we are being, there's no parts, is there? There's no parts. There is just ourselves in the form of what is here, in the form of what is here. All right? It's not me looking at that. I'm just simply being myself. And being myself includes this beautiful phrase he uses, we're awake to the moment by being ourselves. This is where it's all different from that Buddhist approach, mindfulness and all of that stuff. Yeah, the emphasis on being in Vedanta is extraordinary. He used the word sat all of the time. I find it more helpful to use the word being, but that's not the point. So what we find is that we can't exhaust being. So when we're resting in being, we can't exhaust it. We don't arrive at a point. Being is a living presence that's ever new. It's not thinkable. So you can't think of it. It's not an object. You can't describe it because it's not an object. And you can't see it with your senses. You can only be it. This is the whole point. This is what, but this transcendence, this resting in being, notice in Swami, it's not living in another world away from this one. On the contrary, it's only when you are being do you see what's in front of you. And the most interesting thing about what he calls, resting in the lap of Isvara is that, self-dissatisfaction is this thing of I hate being what I'm like. So I've got a hating part that's hating the part that it hates. The self that it takes yourself to be that you hate. Do you see how that's made of parts? That's not being. Remember St. Thomas Aquinas, being is simple, it has no parts. Has no parts. So it's not describable, it's not perceivable by the senses. In other words, it's nothing. It's nothing. It's nothing. Some of the early Buddhist texts talk about this nothingness or sunyata or whatever, but we won't go there. But so what we want to do is, and we understand that if we just simply live this understanding, so we remain with ourselves, what happens is that by remaining with ourselves, we're drawn more and more into being. I don't know what it is. It's just, you're just drawn more and more into being. There's something here. There's a depth here that we don't see if we think about it all. Right? But what we do notice is that because there's no friction, one part fighting the other part, there's a composure. That does not mean to say that you like the present experience. I'm not talking about that. But within ourselves, there's a composure. Okay? Composed, together. And secondly, in being, things come and go, but they're not determining our being. We're not slipping into being a this or a that. So we're free. So freedom and being is one and the same. When I am being, I am being free. But lastly, the most important thing is this, is that all of our psychological problems boil down to this experience of I hate being what I'm like, some form of self-dissatisfaction. See, Dayananda has one term for all of the so-called diverse forms. So what we're looking at is that this fear and insecurity. Now, what is wrong with finding a place in ourselves where there's no fear and there's no self-dissatisfaction, no self-hatred? You're with me? This is what, then we know kind of what we're doing. We just arrive and we find ourselves simply being, and in that simply being, we go beyond fear and self-dissatisfaction. How good is that? The problem is it's not exciting. This is not exciting. This is from the side of personality, it's like a dark hole. Some of it in our Western mystical tradition, they talk about the dark night of the soul, don't they? From the point of personality, it's very dark. It's absence. There's nothing. Right? So this is why Swami Dayananda says it's so important to become familiar with ourselves as this, to become familiar with ourselves as this. Now, is this necessarily easy? No, it's not, because sometimes what's going to happen is if you come back to yourself as you are, you might have unexplainable and not even, you can't think, just a kind of misery or emptiness or boredom. That's okay. Because you see, in terms of our binding desires, we want something, don't we? But you know, this Augustinian longing, this longing to be at home, this longing to find rest. My heart is restless until I rest in thee. That part of us loves reality. Actually, the very presence of reality itself is meaningful, because it's only the presence of reality in my life that is the transformative factor. The presence of reality transforms me as an individual. I don't transform me as an individual. Okay? I don't do that. So what we're going to look at is we're going to approach this very simply. What we're going to do is what I've been talking about now, we're going to just simply consciously and knowingly live that understanding. And basically, you know how I give great emphasis to remaining with myself as I am. You see, if I come back to myself now, I want you to do this as I'm talking. So we come back to ourselves as we are. Now, straight away, when we come back to the actual feel of ourselves here, sitting here, because it's there, I'm seeing it. Instantly, when I actually come back to myself as I am, I find myself being alive to what's happening. Isn't that interesting? Now, this remaining Basically, I'm remaining as myself, and I'm basically placing myself in God's hands. I'm not going to try and change myself, get good, or anything else. The embrace of God embraces me as I am. This is important for what Swami Dayananda says. This is the basis of self-acceptance. I'm just embraced as I am. So I'm going to quietly sit here for about 4 minutes. I'm not going to try and do anything. I'm not going to try and make my mind quiet. I'm not going to try and make myself more comfortable. Because I understand that the presence of God is not away from the form my experience is taking. If that form is empty or boring, guess what? In the teaching, that is the presence of God in that form. So you're going to remain with the presence of the given, because the presence of the given is the presence of the giver. This has nothing to do with getting egoic, feeling good about myself or bad about myself. This goes beyond those opposites. But this is what we mean by contemplation in Vedanta. And Swami Dayananda says we can actually we can discover a disposition where we actually just simply like being. And so we're being contemplative. We're not trying to get anywhere. We're not trying to become enlightened and all that nonsense, right? Delusional nonsense. We're appreciating being, and we're appreciating living in being. Are we all tracking here? So just come back to yourself here now. We notice there's a lot of, because it's there, I'm seeing it. So in the light of awareness, which is constantly working, it is simply revealing what is here, and I'm living in this light of awareness. God's giving this awareness to us as our awareness, as our eyes. There's no movement to become. There's just simply being. No struggling, no striving. There's only the presence of being in shifting forms. The way to invite Isvara into our lives is by being aware of him. Him being the presence of everything. We're becoming aware of ourselves, appreciating ourselves, familiar with ourselves as being. Not a this or a that. It is only in this are we freed from the burden of being ourselves, in the sense of the struggling, striving, fearful human being. A life of self-preservation is a burden. But it's only in this vision of God are we lifted out of this burden. Swami Dayananda puts it, there's less of us and more of Isvara. Okay, Michelle.
Well, we do this, and oh, my dog wants to leave the room, so I'll take care of her. It's so pleasant to be in that space, and then it's so often that I forget during the day, getting busy, being having all these needs, and all of a sudden I go into the quiet place, and it surprises me that the self-acceptance is really there when I really didn't think I could ever, touch it even. It's just there. And that is so comforting to me.
Well, you bring up a very good point, Michelle. How Swami Dayananda puts it, the attitude of acceptance, which they call graceful acceptance in the tradition, is born out of our understanding of God. So we don't do it. It's our understanding of the fact that we're embraced by this presence of God, that the cognition of that brings about the acceptance. We don't do it. Yeah. It's God's presence acting on us, the understanding acting on us. So it's a very good point that you bring up. And it's important, and it's very helpful because Sylvia and I, we often sit in the mornings, for example. Do you know what I mean? We just sit with ourselves, because sitting with ourselves is sitting with God. Does that make sense? It's not, we don't do any, because, and the more we practice this, and you see, when I say practice, the critics of this in functional life, you've got doing and you've got non-doing, right? This is not non-doing because you're not doing anything. Like Dayananda called it the supreme action, but it's the action of understanding. Does that make sense? It's the action of being filled completely with the presence of God. That and that alone transforms us. The rest is fluff. The rest is just fluff. Very good, Michelle. Robert, don't you dare go to sleep on me, Robert. You'll hurt my feelings.
Well, you just watch your feelings get hurt. That's all.
Okay. So what did you notice, Robert? He's getting sharp, isn't he?
I didn't have enough wine. Okay, so well, I did notice there was sometimes there was a desire to shut out visual stimulation. Mm-hmm. And so that seemed to allow composure to be more easily available. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, bear in mind, your eyes open or your eyes closed. In one sense, sometimes when you close your eyes, it's because when we look at it's easier to have a mental association. So when you close your eyes, and there's just simply the the presence of yourself, do you know what I mean? Maybe sounds, you're right. But remember what Dayananda says? If you want to go and touch the ocean, you don't have to get into a boat. The ocean is wherever there's water. So it doesn't really matter whether it's when you're with eyes closed, eyes open. Just do what you know that existential notion, if you know what, you know how. If you know all you're doing is you're abiding in the presence of what's here, then it becomes,
Yeah, it's all good, right?
yeah, it's simple, no parts. No
Mm.
parts. Very, very good, Robert. Amy.
Well, I felt a smile come to my face several times, a natural smile. I really appreciate it. You're giving us that time to just be still. It was good.
Yes, in our Western scriptures, have you heard that saying, be still and know that I am God?
Yes, yes.
You know, a beautiful saying. Very good. And the thing is that if we understand that when we meditate like this way, Swami Dayananda called it meditation. When we meditate this way, we're spending time with God. And that changes us. That it's only the action of God's presence on us that changes us. We don't change ourselves. We can change our conduct, as I've explained. But we have to understand fully, in our Western scriptures, we have another saying, beautiful saying, I of mine own self can do nothing, the Father within me doeth the work.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So it's, and all of these people that, that you meet, no matter what tradition, like Madame Goyon and people like that, they all arrive at this point. They all arrive at this simplicity. And it's so ordinary that it's completely missed. But we need to learn. We need to learn to remain with ourselves as we are. I'll go into that in a minute, why that is in a minute. Okay, very good. Kevin.
I just found myself sort of remaining in being or abiding in being. I don't know how I do it, but because it's a bit like that funny thing, if you know what, you know how.
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't.
How's a process word? For Dayananda, like what? What is God? Not like how do you get to God?
It's always what.
It's always what. And the St. Thomas said St. Thomas had the same thing. That you ask yourself, what is it? Because that opens your eyes. We in the functional West are always concerned with how. How do we do this? How do I understand this? All of this stuff. Yeah. You were saying, Kevin?
So it's interesting that just because of what I've been, just with the emphasis, like what you said, be still and know that I am God, or partake in the presence of God. That it's helpful for me to have an emphasis of being silent, respectfully silent, or appreciatively silent, and just resting, and not emphasis on what's actually.
No, not emphasis on the form.
I'm just not even interested. I'm showing things. I just aware of, but it's because I'm so my functional living background is so inquisitive. It's not helpful. In fact, it's a impediment. It's one of my impediments to understand. Because it's just let myself be cooked in or bathed in the presence of God, and what he shows me, fine. What he doesn't show me, fine. But I know this will fix me up if you like.
Yes, the full.
So I find myself lovingly embraced, and I don't even know how it is, but it just is.
It's extremely good to know that we're always embraced by the love that is God all of the time. And the thing is that not even this world of forms, it can, you know, the way he puts it is like an ocean, and you got rough waves and you got smooth waves. So you got the contraries of human experience, right? But what he says is you can always see water. So even though we hope that we put our salvation into hoping for only smooth waves as opposed to rough waves. Wrong emphasis, because we're then trying to get the solution to our lives from external things. That we're never going to be able to we can never obliterate the contraries of human experience, but we can transcend it, and we arrive at what they call in our Western scriptures the secret place of the Most High. It's beyond the opposites. It is the only place of refuge, and the more we learn to settle in this refuge, the more we actually, on a daily basis, and you'll find it calls you back. It calls you back. You know, you suddenly find you're lost. I'm sure you find this, Amy. You know, you get lost, and then suddenly it comes back, and you're drawn back, because the action of God is to bring you back to itself. Thank goodness for that. It's grace. Very, very good. Sweetheart.
Okay, so it's like a journey for me.
Yeah.
Because in the beginning, I actually thought that I had to go to a retreat or a group of like-minded people in order to be able to do this, because on my own I couldn't do it. And you know, tried lots of different things, meditation, thinking that I had to be in a certain way of, in a certain posture, sitting or whatever. So many different, I was putting so many conditions on this, you know. And so it's actually, I think I'm actually arriving at the point where I realized that there has to be no special conditions, no candle lit or soft music in the background, or the contrary. Like they're all probably impediments to see what really is. And I think the thing is that we don't really want to see what we really like. And so we put all of these nice things around us, hoping that, because I think sometimes God is like our parents, you know, we have to be good or God is going to punish us. Like with our parents, we have to be good, otherwise we're going to get into trouble. At least that was my experience. So it's kind of like, you got to see what God is. God is not a man in heaven pointing the finger at you and saying, I know what you're all about, you know. And
Thank God.
yeah, yeah. And anyway, the good thing about me being married to you, Bede, is that you won't let it rest. You know, it's like I would have fallen asleep on the laurels, you know, for years with that. You in my life always kind of reminding me about it, or talking about it, or reading about it, or whatever. So it's always a constant reminder, which is very helpful, actually. So yeah, so coming to the point where not realizing, and it happens very often during the day, I still get caught up in it, but coming to the realization that functional life has nothing to do with what we're talking about here. That my functional life does not have to be perfect in order for me to become spiritual. That on the contrary, it's completely two different things altogether, and not mixing the two.
Yes.
And so it's actually, I think I'm coming to the end of the journey in the sense of realizing where it is and where it's not.
Right.
And so, yeah. So this has been.
It's interesting that Krishnamurti said a good thing once. He said, in the lesser, which is functional life, the greater isn't, but in the greater, the lesser is. So being completely embraces our functional life. But if there's only our functional life and no being, which is the life of becoming, there is an inevitable suffering and an angst that we can't explain, and we try and struggle to get out of it, and we use functional means to try and dig ourselves out. It's interesting that Einstein says you can never solve the problem at the level of the problem. So,
Yeah, but little did I know that actually being exactly how I am, even in a problem, it's letting God in.
Yes.
Little did I know that it's actually in that very unhappiness that I'm trying to resolve.
Yes.
Is where I can find peace.
Good. That's what I'm going to just talk about now, just before. Yeah. Now.
Yeah. Sorry.
Thing is, no, it's good. Now, so what happens is, we get familiar with what it means to be with ourselves as we are, because the as we are is precisely the doorway where we encounter God. Now, it's a very interesting thing that we need to learn to do this. You know, when they talk about remaining the same with, you know, the karma yoga thing, remaining the same. This is remaining the same. Remaining the same isn't the sameness in terms of what we think the forms that should be there, like calmness and tranquility and all that nonsense. So it's very important to learn to be able to remain with our human suffering without resistance. Now, is this easy? No, it's not. I don't find it easy. Do you mean? So sometimes when you're with yourself, tremendous boredom, a boredom might become evident. Now, when that boredom happens, it's like, oh, I'm bored. So straight away I'm into the fractional thing, aren't I? I'm into the broken up. I'm no longer simple. There's no longer, but it's extremely important to learn how to be with suffering. I think this is an extremely important thing, because then we start, our relationship with suffering changes. We become less afraid of it and all of this sort of stuff. So this, you see, when I'm with myself as I am, you know, when they talk about, the Shin Buddhists talk about entrusting, and they say they don't take the religious, the English term trust, meaning belief, that I believe that God's there and is going to help me. They see faith not as belief, but as trust. So that faith as belief is one thing, but then faith as trust is another. So what happens is, the Shin Buddhists talk about how you place yourself in a chair, but you trust the chair is going to support you. That's trust. That's faith. Does that make sense? So what we're doing is, when we're in pain and when we're mixed up, and who's ever been in pain, mixed up, agitated, not knowing what to do, feeling helpless? Who's been into that? Okay, I've got a PhD in that, right? Now, the thing is, to remain with myself as I am is to literally place myself in the presence of God. And then that presence operates on me, on my condition. And the thing is that, you know, we all talk about the dark side, you know, the Jungians talk about the shadow, Freud talks about the unconscious. And the thing is that as personality, we're a whole lot of resistances. We're actually a resistance against the light, the truth, or whatever, because this light is always revealing us. Who's ever been caught midstream when you realize that you're talking to someone unkindly? Who's ever had that happen? That you just suddenly you see you are being unkind, where the moment before you are feeling right, but then suddenly this light comes in and goes, you're being unkind. Who's ever experienced that? This light doesn't care about our vanity. But what's important is we're emphasizing now, we're not trying to be right or happy. We're not trying to be happy. We're trying to see what is. Being committed to the truth is seeing what is. Yeah, Amy?
I had to go to the hygienist the other day, and they changed the time 3 times. And I had a crying child at my house, an upset mother. So I was pulled, and I ended up getting there 10 minutes later than the time they gave me. But I walked into the hygienist, into the chair with all this stuff going on. And I looked at the hygienist and I saw that she had absolutely nothing to do with what was going on here. So I did what you recommend so many times. I just sat with that agitation as I was.
Yep.
And I sat for it, until she started working on me. And of course it dissipated and we had a very nice connection. But that light came in and showed me, what did this poor woman have to do with all the nonsense I walked in with, and allowed me to just watch it, just see what was going on in the mind and
Now,
the
isn't it
body.
interesting how God appears as your wisdom? Does that make sense? It obtains in you as wisdom, so a new way of seeing. And not
Yes.
only that, because you understand that what shines away the darkness is only the light. But if you're denying the darkness, that light is not available to be shined away, if you like.
Right.
That's the problem. So if we understand God, all of the metaphors in the Sufi tradition, Christian tradition, that God is like a light that's shining. We're cut off because we live in a subjective world. So we're cold, first of all, cold and miserable, and completely in darkness. Now, it's interesting that when you are caught up, you're just in darkness. The moment wisdom entered into your life at that particular moment, God becoming present in your life as a new way of seeing. Does that make sense? In other words, he's giving you his life as your life. Magnificent thing, if you think about it, right? So, and what happens is then a real shift can occur. So then you're in the light. There's a saying by St. John in the original Greek. It goes, those who are doing the truth are coming to the light. It's a strange, the language is strange, but the thing is that what happens is this light operates on you. So you are a recipient of this light, and you're also a recipient of the necessary results of it. And what we're told, what Swami Dayananda says and Shankara says, the light of knowledge is what removes the darkness. Nothing else can remove the darkness. No karma, none of that. It's only this light. And so what happens is that this is a prime example of, thank you for bringing it up, because that's exactly, we come under the sway of something entirely different. And we give up this, this is this whole thing of you are enclosed in personality and the world that goes with it, right? The person
right.
called Amy and all of the world, the unfair world and all of that stuff goes with it.
Yes.
But when you are filled with the presence of God in the form of wisdom, notice how it changes your heart, not just your mind. It changes your mind and your heart. So you feel differently. You're moved by something different. Do you see what I mean? And so that's the wonderful thing about this teaching on God. We need to understand and ponder on his teaching about what God is. We don't have to worry about the consequences of that.
Okay.
Do you see what I mean? And because we understand that an appointment with ourselves is an appointment with God, we no longer have to worry about how are we doing spiritually, that stuff, because right here, right now, as I am, I can appreciate the presence of God through knowledge.
Right.
And when through knowledge, I am being the knowing, aren't I? You are literally being the knowing. In other words, it wasn't like you were like this and then you had this wisdom that was in opposition to what you were being like. When the moment you saw it, you went up, you stopped struggling with the external world. The spiritual wisdom led you home. Just remain with yourself, place yourself in the hands of God and let his presence operate on you. This is faith. Faith in God is not a belief. Faith is God is completely dependent on God alone for the transformation. All the rest is fluff. You see what I mean? And so that's very good. So thank you for sharing that, Amy. It's very helpful. So what we're looking at is something very, very simple. We need to become more and more contemplative, as Swami Dayananda would say. And remember that he said, this is the meditation that the Lord Krishna taught Arjuna. Come back to yourself and think of no other thing. It's a very, very profound thing, because it's much better to appreciate yourself as being, as opposed to trying to tell yourself, I'm not my body, I'm not my mind, I'm consciousness and all that. It's much better to appreciate yourself as being, because then you see that you're not this or that. Okay, so just quickly, what is it that's you mainly got out of, it's been highlighted today, Kevin?
Just how readily available this is.
Yep.
The importance of it, the danger of so-called, my living as an individual cut off from God, if you like.
Mm-hmm. Cold and miserable and dark.
Can't be otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
I had trouble with understanding Dayananda when he said bring your mind to yourself and think of nothing else, because I used to think myself as this one who works things out, but I knew it was significant, but I didn't know how to take that. But when it's in the context of myself as this life and being that is God is my life, and I can't do it because it's abidingly present. It's I can only be it, and partake in it. Not that I am God, but I partake in. I become I discover what it means, but to be a holy offspring of God. I think that's a Bible way of expressing it.
God's life is your real life. That's the whole point. Yeah. And that's what we'll call, oneness with the Father. My Father and I are one. However, because of my background, my Father and I are one, but I am not great, but God is greater than me. I tend to go with that one. Do you know what I mean? So, but that's
much safer to keep with that.
I find that, yeah. My Father and I are one, but my Father is greater than I. I tend to think that's a thing. Yeah. Okay, good. Darling.
I was thinking yesterday, the day before, whatever it was, the thought came to me that what is his life for? I mean, here I am, waking up again, another day, same old, get up the next day, and it's kind of like, what's the point of it all? It just seems like an endless getting up in the morning and doing whatever you need to do, and it just keeps repeating itself, But when you're talking about all of these, then because it gets you in touch with something a lot higher than what I am, it doesn't really, those questions are not even there.
Yes.
I think it's just Sylvia that comes up with all of these, they're not there.
There's a beautiful saying in our Western scriptures, be in the world, but not of it. In other words, as personality, we're of the world. There are certain forms, certain habitual emotional reactions and thinking and all of that stuff. But when we're in the world, but not of it, notice how in being, we're definitely in the world. There's no denial. And that is what Swami Dayananda is, this whole emphasis of Vedanta is one thing, being free while living. So there's no denial of it's while we're living. And so to understand and appreciate that in a practical way, we need to be free while we're living. We need to practice that very thing, or live that thing. Very good, darling. Michelle.
Yeah, just because, because I have a similar experience as Sylvia, at times I feel like I'm caught in Groundhog, the movie Groundhog Day. and everything repeats over and over again. I got really again, and then it's like, you know, to be just willing to to be in being, yeah, sweeps everything away, and all of a sudden everything gets to be simple and comprehensible, and it's like, why don't I, you know, why don't I want to be there more often? I just forget, really.
Yes. Well, because the thing is that there is a resistance to being nothing.
Mhm.
And so, and really, the hardest thing for me when I remain with myself is sometimes it's sometimes quite painful to be nothing, to tell you the truth. It's not, however, I know my solution is the only way out is through. So I'll remain with that. And then I go off, chill out, watching movies, you know, whatever, you know what I mean? But the fact of the matter is that I understand that the only place where the resolution is this resolution of personality into Isvara. The resolution, because when I resolve myself as personality, like Amy was talking about, into the presence of God, I arrive at myself as a simple conscious person resting in reality. That's the key. All the rest, you know, that's very good, Michelle. Robert, we're expecting great things from you. What's the thing that stands out for you today?
Simplicity, and there's you know, there's an expression that's often used, it's complicated, when you talk about life and how things happen in life and what to do about them. It's all complicated, but so it's sort of not trying to figure things out, but just realizing that, you know, just sitting in observation and
Observation,
everything
observation that occurs without will.
yeah. And sort of realizing that everything's just occurring in front of you. So that sort of short circuits any sense of identification, because it's all in front of you, you know, so you can't be what's in front of you. You're that which I mean, in a way, it sounds dualistic, but I think it's a necessary dualism.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. Once we know what we're talking about, there's no problem with language. We don't have to worry about, am I using dualistic language, or, you know,
Right.
Yeah. And the thing is, you know, it's this simple, you know, Dayananda's basic vision of Vedanta, there is only God, you know. You know, when you first hear, they go, you know, but the thing is that it's interesting that the word complicate in Latin, com means together, plic means all tangled up, to make tangled up all together.
Yeah. Okay.
And also the word complex and simple. Simple means without parts. Complex means with many parts. We never really can, you know, trying to understand the world of function and form and all of this sort of stuff, really, you know, you do your best you can functionally, but you're never going to solve it. It is complicated by necessity. But there is when you're rooted in being, it finds its right place. You understand, okay, I've got limitations of cognition. I'm not really seeing clearly, maybe I will sometimes, or whatever. I'm going to be functionally smart sometimes. I'm going to stuff it up at other times. But you're not, that really isn't the issue. It's like what Sylvia said. What's the meaning and purpose for life? Now, in our Western tradition, is the meaning and purpose of life is to glorify God. What does that mean? That means that when the presence of God becomes incarnated as Amy's way of seeing and way of being, do you know what I mean? That's the purpose of life. Do you know what I mean? To live a God-governed life. All the rest is somewhat difficult. Very, very good, Robert. Amy, what's the most thing that stands out to you today? I can't hear you, Amy.
Okay. Just the importance of this, taking the time to rest the way you did with us. I usually meditate with the mantra, but I'm appreciating more and more, in addition to meditating with the mantra, is sitting in this stillness, sitting with myself, and also the importance of obeying this knowledge when it comes in, this recognition when it comes in, to stop, to listen, to observe, to be with myself in whatever condition I find in mind or whatever.
Well, very good, because I know you're Catholic, and the thing, one of the in the Psalms, I think it is, it's listen, hear, and obey. Not because of I better obey, but when that wisdom obtained in you, and you're being caught up, and and she's got nothing to do with it. When that you just obeyed that, if you know what I mean, you were willing to, you understood that your salvation is found in just simply obeying, in the sense of be governed by this wisdom, because it protects you. It's very, very benevolent. It's very benevolent. Being cut off from the light is punishing. That's what real hell is. Hell is not a punishment-induced thing because you've been naughty. Do you mean? Hell has been cut off from God. And it's a hell that everyone denies, but it's ever present. We see the manifestations of it all over the place. Do you know what I mean? But that's very good, Amy. And thank you. Thanks again for bringing up that example of that. It was very helpful to clarify what we're talking about. All right. Well, very, very nice talking and seeing you guys again. And I'll see you in 2 weeks.